Deep in the heart of the Imperial Palace on Terra, encased within the Golden Throne, sits what remains of the Master of Mankind. For 10,000 years the Emperor has endured in this state, neither fully alive nor truly dead, his shattered body sustained only through arcane technology and the daily sacrifice of 1,000 souls. But how did the most powerful being in human history come to this wretched fate? The answer lies in the single greatest act of treachery ever committed, a betrayal so profound that it shattered an empire and condemned humanity to an eternity of war. This is the story of Horus Lupercal, the Emperor's most beloved son, and the catastrophic civil war that bears his name. The Horus Heresy stands as the defining tragedy of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, a galactic catastrophe that claimed over 2 trillion lives and fundamentally transformed the Imperium of Man from a beacon of hope into the grim authoritarian nightmare it has become. To understand this betrayal, we must journey back to the earliest days of the Emperor's grand design, to a time when humanity stood on the precipice of extinction, and one immortal being dared to reshape the destiny of an entire species. But before we enter the 41st millennium, a simple request. Subscribe to Obsidian Scriptorium. For you, it's a simple tap. For me, it's proof of loyalty that keeps the Inquisition from auditing my existence. The Emperor protects those with good metrics, so let the story begin. The Emperor of Mankind is perhaps the most enigmatic figure in all of Warhammer 40,000 lore. His true origins remain shrouded in mystery and deliberate obfuscation, with conflicting accounts scattered throughout Imperial history. According to ancient records, he was born around 8,000 years before the Common Era, in the region of Anatolia on Old Earth. One origin story speaks of shamans, powerful psykers of prehistoric humanity who foresaw the growing threats in the warp and chose to sacrifice themselves in a great ritual. Thousands of these shamans supposedly poisoned themselves simultaneously, their souls merging in the immaterium to reincarnate as a single, impossibly powerful being. Another account, revealed in more recent histories, describes a young boy whose psychic powers awakened when his uncle murdered his father in what may have been humanity's first premeditated killing. In that moment of trauma and rage, the child who had become emperor stopped the murderer's heart with a thought, his vast power manifesting for the first time. Which version is true? Perhaps both, perhaps neither. The Emperor himself has never definitively explained his origins, and given his ability to alter how others perceive him, to appear differently to different observers, we may never know the complete truth. What we do know is that for nearly 40,000 years, the Emperor walked among humanity as a silent guide. He took many forms throughout history, sometimes appearing as great leaders and conquerors, other times as humble advisors and teachers. He influenced the development of human civilization from the shadows, always working toward a single, unified vision for the species. Through the long millennia of human expansion across the stars, through the glory of the dark age of technology when humanity achieved wonders that would seem like sorcery to later generations, the Emperor watched and waited. Then came the Age of Strife, a catastrophic period that nearly ended humanity's story forever. The warp storms that had allowed faster-than-light travel suddenly became impossibly violent and unpredictable. The fall of the Eldari, that apocalyptic event that birthed the chaos god Slanesh and tore a permanent wound in reality, sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Human colonies across the stars found themselves isolated, cut off from Terra and from each other. Worlds that had reached heights of technological sophistication collapsed into barbarism. Artificial intelligences turned on their creators in the nightmare known as the Cybernetic Revolt. Psykers, humans with powers drawn from the warp, began manifesting in greater numbers, and many became conduits for demonic possession. Terra itself, the cradle of humanity, descended into a hellscape of warring techno-barbarian kingdoms. Warlords with access to fragments of Dark Age technology carved out brutal empires, fighting endless wars of conquest across the radioactive wastes of old Earth. Billions died in the atomic fires and gene weapon plagues unleashed during these conflicts. The human species seemed destined for extinction, scattered and fragmented across a hostile galaxy. This was when the Emperor finally revealed himself. No longer content to work from the shadows, he emerged at the end of the Age of Strife with a vision of unity and order. He possessed knowledge and power beyond comprehension, technological secrets from the Dark Age that even the fractured mechanicum of Mars had forgotten, and psychic might that dwarfed any other being in the material universe. The Emperor began his conquest of Terra, creating the Thunder Warriors, genetically enhanced super soldiers who were the precursors to the Space Marines. These warriors were powerful but unstable, designed specifically for the brutal work of unifying a ravaged homeworld. The Unification Wars were savage beyond measure. The Emperor showed no mercy to those who would not bend the knee, and his Thunder Warriors crushed opposition with overwhelming force. Yet he also displayed a genius for diplomacy and statecraft, winning allies through shows of strength and promises of order. The fractured kingdoms of Terra fell one by one. The Emperor forged alliances with key figures like Malcador the Sigillite, who would become his most trusted advisor and right hand. He made pacts with the Mechanicum of Mars, trading technological secrets and religious tolerance for their support and manufacturing capacity. But the Emperor's vision extended far beyond Terra. He knew that scattered human colonies across the galaxy were suffering in isolation, easy prey for Xenos predators and the corrupting influence of chaos. He understood that only a unified humanity, spread across 1,000,000 worlds and bound together by common purpose, could hope to survive the hostile galaxy. To achieve this, the Emperor needed more than the Thunder Warriors. He needed commanders of superhuman intellect and martial prowess, leaders who could conquer worlds and inspire absolute loyalty. Using forbidden sciences and what some whisper were secrets stolen from the Chaos Gods themselves, the Emperor created his greatest work, the Primarchs, 20 genetically engineered beings, crafted from the Emperor's own genetic template and infused with power drawn from the warp. Each was designed to excel in specific aspects of warfare and leadership. Each was intended to serve as the general of a Space Marine legion, armies of enhanced warriors created from the Primarch's own genetic code. But the Chaos Gods, ever watching from their realm in the Immaterium, recognized the threat these beings posed. In an act of cosmic malice, they reached out from the warp and scattered the infant Primarchs across the galaxy before the Emperor could complete their conditioning. The 20 Gene Sons were lost, cast to distant worlds where they would grow in isolation shaped by alien environments and local cultures. This catastrophe could have ended the Emperor's plans before they truly began. Instead, he adapted. The Emperor created the Space Marine legions anyway, using the genetic material the Primarchs had left behind. These legions would serve as the primary instrument of the Great Crusade, the massive military campaign to reunite humanity under the banner of the Imperium. And the Emperor would find his lost sons, reclaiming them one by one as the Crusade expanded across the stars. The Great Crusade launched in the early decades of the 31st millennium, a tsunami of military might that swept across the galaxy. The Emperor led from the front in these early years, his golden armour shining like a beacon of hope as he brought world after world into compliance. The Thunder Warriors, their purpose fulfilled, and their genetic instability making them unsuitable for the long campaign ahead, were quietly eliminated. The age of the Imperium had begun, and nothing would stand in its way. The first of the Emperor's lost sons to be found was Horus Lupercal. His capsule had landed on Chthoniya, a hive world of violent gangs and brutal survival located mere light years from Terra itself. The young Primarch had been discovered by a gang lord named Kagedon, and given the name Nergui, which meant no name in the local tongue. Even as a child, Horus displayed the superhuman qualities that set the Primarchs apart. He grew at an astounding rate, quickly becoming one of Chthonia's most fearsome warriors. When the Emperor arrived at Chthоnia during the early Great Crusade, the reunion between father and son was immediate and profound. Unlike some of his later discoveries, where Primarchs had grown bitter or twisted by their upbringings, Horus embraced his father's vision with complete devotion. The Emperor saw in Horus not just a powerful warrior, but a natural leader with charm and tactical brilliance that surpassed even his gene-enhanced brothers. He renamed the young warrior Horus Lupercal, and gave him command of the 16th Legion, which Horus christened the Lunar Wolves. For decades, Horus fought at his father's side as the only Primarch, the sole gene-son in a galaxy full of enemies. This created a bond between them that none of the later found Primarchs could match. Horus learned warfare and statecraft directly from the Emperor, observing how his father waged war and negotiated peace, how he wielded both military might and political cunning to bring worlds into the Imperial fold. The Emperor showed Horus favour above all others, and the Primarch responded with absolute loyalty and love for his father. As the Great Crusade expanded, the Emperor found his other sons, Leman Russ of the Space Wolves on the brutal world of Fenris, Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels on the death world of Caliban, Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children, discovered as the sole survivor of a crashed colony ship, Perturabo of the Iron Warriors, Jagatai Khan of the White Scars, Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fists. Each Primarch brought unique strengths to the Crusade. Each commanded their own legion, with distinctive tactics and culture. But Horus remained first among equals. His record of conquest was unmatched. He possessed an almost supernatural ability to assess a military situation and deploy exactly the right forces in exactly the right way. More than that, Horus could inspire loyalty not just through fear or duty, but through genuine affection and respect. His brother Primarchs loved him. His Space Marines would die for him without hesitation, and even the baseline human soldiers of the Imperial Army spoke his name with reverence. The Great Crusade achieved victory after victory. Xenos empires that had ruled their regions of space for millennia were destroyed or driven into hiding. Human worlds that had descended into barbarism or fallen under alien domination were brought back into the fold. The Imperium expanded at an incredible pace, adding hundreds of worlds each year to its growing dominion. The Emperor's vision of a unified humanity seemed within reach. Then came Ulanor, a massive Orc empire that had conquered vast swaths of space and threatened to become an existential threat to the Imperium. The Emperor assembled a massive force to destroy this greenskin menace, and at its head stood Horus and his Lunar Wolves. The campaign was brutal but ultimately successful. Horus personally slew the Orc warlord in single combat, decapitating the enemy leadership and causing their empire to collapse into infighting. At the triumph following the Ulanor Crusade, the Emperor made an announcement that would change everything. He declared Horus Warmaster, giving him supreme command over all Imperial military forces. The title placed Horus as second only to the Emperor himself in authority, with the power to command even his brother Primarchs. It was the highest honour imaginable, and Horus accepted it with characteristic humility and determination. But the triumph at Ulanor also marked the beginning of the end. The Emperor announced that he would be returning to Terra to oversee a secret project of vital importance. He did not explain the nature of this project, not even to Horus, his most trusted son. The Warmaster would continue the Great Crusade while the Emperor worked in seclusion on Terra, pursuing goals he refused to share even with his gene-sons. This decision planted the first seeds of resentment. The Primarchs felt abandoned by their father at the very moment of their greatest triumph. Horus, despite his elevation to Warmaster, felt the sting of being kept in the dark about the Emperor's work. What could be so important that the Master of Mankind would withdraw from the crusade he had led for 2 centuries? Why would he keep secrets from the son he trusted with command of his armies? The Emperor's secret project was the Imperial Webway, an attempt to create humanity's own version of the ancient Eldari network that allowed instantaneous travel across the galaxy, without exposure to the warp. Using the Golden Throne, an artifact of the Dark Age of technology, the Emperor had opened a portal into the webway beneath the Imperial Palace. He directed tens of thousands of Mechanicum workers to expand this section of the network, creating a human-built addition that could connect all the worlds of the Imperium. If successful, this project would free humanity from dependence on warp travel and the Astronomicon. Ships could traverse the galaxy without being exposed to the predations of chaos. Psychers would no longer be necessary for interstellar communication. The Emperor's grand vision was nothing less than the salvation of the human species, cutting them off from the corrupting influence of the warp entirely. But the Emperor did not share these plans with his sons. Perhaps he feared that knowledge of the Webway project would make it a target for chaos. Perhaps he believed the Primarchs would not understand the necessity of this work. Or perhaps, as some have suggested, the Emperor simply did not trust his creations with information he deemed too important for even them to know. Whatever his reasons, the Emperor's silence created a wound in his relationship with the Primarchs, particularly Horus. The Warmaster continued to wage the Great Crusade with brilliance and determination, but questions gnawed at him. Why had his father abandoned the crusade at its height? What secrets was he keeping? And most troubling of all, what would happen to the Primarchs and their legions once the crusade was complete? Into this growing uncertainty stepped Lorgar of the Wordbearers Legion. Lorgar had always been different from his brothers, more spiritual and less concerned with martial glory. He worshipped the Emperor as a god, building vast monuments and conducting religious ceremonies before bringing worlds into compliance. This displeased the Emperor, who preached the imperial truth, a doctrine of reason and science that rejected superstition and religion. The Emperor made an example of Lorgar, forcing him and his entire legion to kneel before the ruins of Monarchia, a city the Wordbearers had spent decades building as a monument to the Emperor's divinity. Ultramarines under Robute Guilliman had razed the city on the Emperor's orders, and now the Wordbearers were humiliated before the entire crusade. The Emperor told Lorgar in no uncertain terms that he was not a god and would not be worshipped as one. This public humiliation shattered something in Lorgar. He began searching for other gods to worship, beings who would welcome his devotion rather than reject it. His search led him to the Chaos Gods, the great powers of the warp who had plagued humanity since time immemorial. Lorgar discovered the truth that the Emperor had desperately tried to hide, that gods existed, that they hungered for worship and souls, and that they would gladly accept what the Emperor had spurned. Lorgar and his most trusted subordinate, First Chaplain Erebus, began a long campaign to corrupt the other legions. They introduced the concept of warrior lodges, seemingly harmless fraternal organizations where space marines of different ranks could meet as equals. These lodges spread through the legions like a virus, creating secret networks of influence that bypassed the normal chain of command. And within these lodges, Erebus and his agents whispered doubts and heresies, preparing the ground for the great betrayal to come. The warrior lodge that Erebus established in the Lunar Wolves would prove to be the most important of all. Here, he cultivated relationships with key members of Horus's inner circle, including members of the Mournival, the Warmaster's closest advisors. Erebus carefully planted suggestions and exploited grievances, always working toward a single goal, the corruption of the Warmaster himself. The opportunity came on the world of Davin, a feral planet that Horus and the Lunar Wolves had brought into compliance decades earlier. The Wordbearers had remained behind after the Lunar Wolves departed, teaching the native population the imperial truth. But Erebus had done more than teach. He had corrupted the Davinites, turning them into secret worshippers of chaos and establishing the Serpent Lodge, a cult dedicated to the ruinous powers. 60 years after the initial compliance, the Lunar Wolves received word that the Imperial commander on Davin's moon had rebelled. Horus led a force to personally deal with the rebellion, walking directly into the trap Erebus had spent decades preparing. The moon of Davin had been transformed by chaos into a nightmarish landscape. Where once there had been temperate forests and clear skies, Now there was only fog-choked swampland reeking of decay. The Imperial garrison had been corrupted by the power of Nurgle, the chaos god of pestilence and despair, transformed into plague-ridden zombies that still moved and fought despite their rotting flesh. The former governor, Yugen Temba, had been twisted into a grotesque champion of chaos. But more importantly, Erebus had given him a weapon, the Kinnebrak Anathame, a blade stolen from the Interrex, an advanced human civilization the Lunar Wolves had briefly encountered. This was no ordinary weapon. The Anathame had been crafted with sorcery and blessed by the Chaos Gods themselves. It possessed the power to wound even a Primarch, to bypass the supernatural resilience that made Horus nearly invincible. The battle in the corrupted wreckage of the starship Glory of Terra was brief but devastating. Horus led his warriors in a brutal assault against the plague zombies, cutting through them with the contempt they deserved. He confronted the corrupted Temba personally, barely recognizing the bloated, diseased thing that had once been a capable Imperial commander. The two clashed, and Horus's superior skill quickly won out. But as Temba fell, dying, he managed one final blow. The Anathame pierced Horus's armour and cut deep into his flesh. The Warmaster killed Temba and claimed victory, but the wound would not heal. The Anatheme's sorcerous poison spread through Horus's superhuman physiology, overwhelming even his enhanced immune system. The Warmaster collapsed, falling into a coma as his body tried desperately to fight off the chaos-tainted infection. His gene sons, the Space Marines of the Lunar Wolves, were frantic with worry. Their Primarch, the greatest warrior in the galaxy, lay dying, and all their technology and skill could not save him. Erebus saw his moment. He suggested that they take Horus to the Serpent Lodge on Davin proper, claiming it was a place of healing where the native priests might have knowledge that could save the Warmaster. The Warrior Lodge members of the Lunar Wolves, desperate to save their Gene Father, agreed without understanding what they were truly doing. They carried Horus into the temple called the Delphos, a massive structure built within a crater, and placed him in the care of the Chaos cultists who dwelt there. The Serpent Lodge performed their dark rituals, and Horus's consciousness was torn from his body and cast into the warp. There, in that nightmare realm of pure thought and emotion, Erebus waited for him. The Word-Bearer disguised himself as Hastur Sejanus, Horus's most trusted friend and advisor, who had died earlier in the Crusade. Speaking with Sejanus's voice and wearing his face, Erebus showed Horus a vision of the future. In this carefully crafted lie, Horus saw an Imperium where the Emperor had become a god, worshipped by trillions of zealous believers. He saw his brother Primarchs elevated to divine status, statues raised in their honour across countless worlds. But Horus himself was absent from this future, forgotten and erased, his contributions to the Great Crusade ignored by an ungrateful humanity. The vision showed temples and priests, superstition and blind faith, everything the Emperor had claimed to oppose through the Imperial truth. The Chaos Gods, speaking through their servants, presented themselves as victims. They claimed the Emperor was a tyrant who sought to enslave them, to steal their power for himself. They suggested that the Emperor had always planned to discard the Primarchs once the Crusade was complete, that the Gene Sons were nothing more than tools to be used and then destroyed, just as the Thunder Warriors had been eliminated once they had served their purpose. Most damning of all, they revealed that the Emperor had used warp power to create the Primarchs in the first place. The very beings the Emperor claimed were purely scientific achievements had been crafted with sorcery, using secrets bargained from the Chaos Gods themselves. The hypocrisy was staggering. The Emperor forbade his sons from using the warp, preached against sorcery and superstition, yet he had built his entire grand plan on foundations of forbidden knowledge. Magnus the Red, Horus's brother and the Primarch of the Thousand Sons, appeared in the vision as well. Magnus tried desperately to warn Horus, to tell him that the vision was a lie, that the Chaos Gods were manipulating him. But Horus, wounded and vulnerable, seeing what he believed was incontrovertible proof of the Emperor's betrayal, made his choice. He would side with the Chaos Gods. He would prevent the grim future he had been shown. He would save humanity from the tyrant who claimed to be its saviour. When Horus emerged from the Delphos 9 days later, he appeared healed. His wound had closed, and his strength had returned. The Lunar Wolves rejoiced at their Primarch's recovery, never suspecting what had transpired in the depths of the temple. But those closest to Horus noticed changes. His personality seemed darker, his humour more cruel. He began to question the Emperor's motives openly, to speak of the Primarchs as tools rather than sons. The Warmaster set to work immediately, exploiting the networks that Erebus and Lorgar had spent years establishing. He reached out to his brother Primarchs, testing their loyalty, probing for weaknesses he could exploit. Angron of the World Eaters, bitter about the Emperor's refusal to save the gladiators he had fought alongside before being found, was easy to sway. Mortarion of the Death Guard, resentful of being forced to kneel to the Emperor before he could personally slay the tyrant who had oppressed his homeworld, joined the conspiracy readily. Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children proved more difficult. The Phoenician had always been one of the most loyal Primarchs, devoted to the ideals of perfection and beauty that he believed the Emperor embodied. But Horus knew his brother's weakness, pride. He gave Fulgrim a weapon, a beautiful blade called the Lair, which unbeknownst to the Phoenician was possessed by a demon. This demon slowly corrupted Fulgrim, turning his quest for perfection into an obsession with excess and sensation that would eventually claim his soul entirely. Lorgar, the architect of the conspiracy, pledged the word-bearers to Horus's cause. The embittered Primarch had waited long for this moment, the chance to strike back at the father who had rejected his worship. Perturabo of the Iron Warriors, overlooked and underappreciated despite his genius for siege warfare, saw in the rebellion a chance to prove his worth. Conrad Kurz of the Night Lords, driven half-mad by visions of violence and betrayal, embraced the opportunity to punish a galaxy he believed deserved nothing but terror. Alpharius of the Alpha Legion joined the conspiracy for reasons that remained opaque, pursuing some Byzantine agenda that perhaps only he understood. Not all of Horus's brothers would turn. Some remained steadfastly loyal to the Emperor. Robute Guilliman of the Ultramarines, Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fists, Sanguinius of the Blood Angels, Leman Russ of the Space Wolves, Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, Vulcan of the Salamanders, Corax of the Raven Guard, and the enigmatic Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels. Jagatai Khan of the White Scars would choose to remain loyal despite his complicated relationship with the Imperium. Magnus the Red, despite his attempts to warn the Emperor of Horus's betrayal, would be forced into the traitor's camp through tragic circumstances. But before the galaxy could learn of this schism, Horus needed to eliminate those within his own forces who would remain loyal. The warrior lodges had identified these individuals, Space Marines who had refused to join the secret societies, or who were known for their unwavering devotion to the Emperor above all else. These loyalists within the traitor legions had to be purged before the heresy could begin in earnest. The Warmaster gathered his forces at Istvaan III, a world in open rebellion against the Imperium. He ordered specific units from the sons of Horus, World Eaters, Death Guard, and Emperor's Children to assault the planet and bring it to compliance. These units comprised the loyalist elements of the traitor legions, warriors who would never follow Horus into open rebellion against the Emperor. As the loyalists fought on the surface of Istvaan III, securing victory after victory against the planet's defenders, Horus revealed the depths of his treachery. The Warmaster ordered a massive orbital bombardment using Life-Eater virus weapons. These horrific bioweapons killed everything on the planet's surface in moments, reducing flesh to sludge and bone to ash. The bombardment slew billions of civilians and thousands of Space Marines loyal to the Emperor, the opening act of the greatest betrayal in human history. This became known as the Istvaan III atrocity, and it marked the true beginning of the Horus Heresy. The die was cast. Horus had murdered his own sons to hide his treachery, and now there could be no going back. The Warmaster had committed himself to a path that could only end in total victory or utter annihilation. Word of the atrocity reached Terra through the heroic efforts of Nathaniel Garrow, a Death Guard captain who had escaped the massacre and fled to the Sol system aboard the frigate Eisenstein. Garrow brought news of Horus's betrayal directly to Rogel Dawn and Malkador the Sigillite, shattering the illusion of unity that had sustained the Imperium for 2 centuries. The Emperor now knew that his most beloved son had turned against him, that half of his Space Marine legions had been corrupted by the very powers he had sought to protect humanity from. But the Emperor could not lead the response to Horus's rebellion himself. The disaster with the Webway project had trapped him. When Magnus the Red had tried to warn the Emperor of Horus's treachery, he had used sorcery to send his message through the warp. This psychic sending had catastrophically breached the wards protecting the Webway portal, allowing demons to flood into the human-built section. The Emperor was forced to remain on the Golden Throne, using his immense psychic power to hold back the tide of chaos and prevent Terra itself from being overrun by warp entities. The defence of the Webway portal consumed the Emperor's attention for much of the heresy. Custodian Guard and Sisters of Silence fought an endless battle in the corridors beneath the Imperial Palace, holding the line against demon legions while the Emperor sat immobile on his throne, spending his power like water to maintain the wards. He could only watch through remote viewing and occasional psychic communication as Horus tore his Imperium apart. With the loyalists within his own legions dead or scattered, Horus moved to his next objective, destroying the legions that remained loyal to the Emperor. The Warmaster knew that 7 full legions of Space Marines stood ready to oppose him, and he needed to reduce those numbers before he could assault Terra. His plan was brutal in its simplicity: lure the Loyalists into a trap and destroy them utterly. Horus sent word to the Loyalist Primarchs that the Warmaster required their aid to deal with a rebellion on Istvaan 5. 7 legions responded: the Iron Hands under Ferrus Manus, the Salamanders under Vulcan, the Raven Guard under Corax, the Iron Warriors under Perturabo, the Wordbearers under Lorgar, the Night Lords under Conrad Kurz, and the Alpha Legion under Alfarius. The first 3 legions would make the initial assault, with the other 4 providing support and reinforcement. The Loyalist Primarchs had no idea that the reinforcing legions had already turned traitor. The drop site massacre at Istvaan 5 would become one of the bloodiest days in Imperial history. Ferrus Manus led the Iron Hands in a furious assault against the traitor positions, his legion's discipline and firepower breaking through the initial defences. The Salamanders and Raven Guard fought alongside them, pushing the traitors back and securing landing zones for the reinforcements. Then the betrayal was revealed. The Iron Warriors, Wordbearers, Night Lords, and Alpha Legion opened fire on their Loyalist brothers from behind. Caught in a devastating crossfire, the 3 Loyalist legions were slaughtered. Ferrus Manus, determined to reach Horus and end the heresy before it could spread further, pushed deep into enemy territory. He confronted Fulgrim, his closest friend among the Primarchs, and the 2 fought a desperate duel. Fulgrim, now fully possessed by the demon in his sword, killed Ferrus Manus. He decapitated the Iron Hands Primarch with his own weapon, Fireblade, and Horus later mounted the severed head on his command throne as a trophy. The Iron Hands Legion was shattered, its survivors scattered and leaderless. Vulcan was presumed dead after being separated from his forces and subjected to horrific torture. Corax barely escaped with a fraction of his Raven Guard, traumatized by the loss of so many of his sons. The Dropsite Massacre achieved Horus's objectives perfectly. 3 of the 7 Loyalist legions were effectively destroyed as fighting forces. The remaining legions would spend years trying to rebuild their strength, time that Horus would use to consolidate his forces and drive toward Terra. The Warmaster had demonstrated that he was willing to use any tactic, no matter how dishonourable, to achieve victory. With the immediate threat to his forces eliminated, Horus began the long campaign toward Terra. but he knew that simply driving straight for the throne world would leave him vulnerable to counterattack from loyalist forces still scattered across the galaxy. The three largest loyalist legions, the Ultramarines, Dark Angels and Blood Angels, were far from terror on campaigns in Ultramar and other distant sectors. Horus needed to keep them occupied and prevent them from interfering with his assault on the Emperor. The Warmaster orchestrated a series of devastating attacks designed to trap and destroy these legions. He sent the Wordbearers to Calth, a forge world in Ultramar, with orders to annihilate the Ultramarines. The resulting Battle of Calth was apocalyptic. Lorga's forces achieved tactical surprise, causing massive casualties among Guilliman's legion in the opening minutes of the assault. But the Ultramarines adapted quickly, and Guilliman's tactical genius turned what should have been a complete massacre into a costly stalemate. The battle raged for months, with neither side able to achieve decisive victory. Lorgar eventually retreated, having failed to destroy the Ultramarines but succeeding in keeping them tied down far from Terra. Meanwhile, Erebus and other Word-Bearers sorcerers worked a great ritual, opening massive warp storms across the region. These storms, collectively known as the Ruin Storm, made warp travel in the region nearly impossible. The Ultramarines, Dark Angels and Blood Angels found themselves trapped on the wrong side of the galaxy, unable to reach Terra to defend the Emperor. Other campaigns of the Heresy saw equally brutal fighting. The Space Wolves had been sent to Prospero to deal with Magnus the Red and the Thousand Suns, but that mission had been manipulated by Horus to ensure Magnus would turn traitor. The Alpha Legion carried out mysterious operations across the galaxy, their goals inscrutable even to the other traitors. The Night Lords engaged in terror campaigns, butchering entire civilian populations to spread fear and despair. The galaxy burned. Trillions died in the fighting or in the chaos that followed when Imperial governance collapsed. Worlds that had stood for centuries as bastions of civilization descended into anarchy as Space Marines fought Space Marines in a civil war that shattered the dream of unity. The Mechanicum split, with Forge Worlds declaring for either the Emperor or Horus, and the resulting conflict on Mars nearly destroyed humanity's primary source of advanced technology. Horus waged his war with terrifying efficiency. Where the Emperor had sought to minimize civilian casualties and preserve human worlds for the Imperium, Horus showed no such restraint. Worlds that resisted were subjected to exterminatus, their entire populations exterminated from orbit. Those that surrendered found themselves ruled by tyrants and madmen who swore allegiance to the Warmaster. Chaos cults sprang up in the wake of Horus's advance, ordinary humans corrupted by the promises of the Dark Gods. 7 years the war raged, 7 years of bloodshed and betrayal that scarred the galaxy beyond recovery. Primarchs fought Primarchs in titanic duels that reshaped planets. Space Marine legions that had fought side by side for 2 centuries now tried to annihilate each other with the same dedication they had once brought to destroying Xenos empires. The very fabric of reality began to tear as the Chaos Gods poured their power into the conflict, strengthening their chosen champions and flooding the Materium with demonic legions. Horus himself grew stronger as the war progressed. He made a pilgrimage to the world of Molech, where the Emperor had once made his own bargain with the Chaos Gods to gain the knowledge to create the Primarchs. There, Horus entered a portal to the realm of chaos and confronted the Dark Gods directly. He emerged from that encounter transformed, imbued with power that rivaled even the Emperor's might. But this power came at a terrible cost. With each passing day, Horus became less the noble Warmaster who had led the Great Crusade and more a puppet of chaos, his soul slowly consumed by the very forces he thought he controlled. The Loyalist Primarchs fought desperately to slow Horus's advance, but they were scattered and isolated, unable to coordinate their efforts effectively. Rogel Dawn fortified Terra, turning the Imperial Palace into the most heavily defended location in the galaxy. Sanguinius returned to Terra from the wrong side of the Ruin Storm, having fought his way through nightmare worlds and demonic ambushes to reach his father's side. Jagatai Khan defended the walls alongside Dawn, his white scars conducting lightning raids against traitor forces. But it was not enough. Horus had gathered an overwhelming force, 9 traitor legions, supported by demon engines, dark mechanicum war machines, and vast armies of corrupted Imperial forces. The Beta Garman cluster, the last major defensive position between the traitor fleet and Terra, fell after a campaign of staggering brutality. The road to the throne world lay open. As Horus's fleet entered the Sol system, the Emperor finally had to face the truth. His grand dream of a rational secular Imperium had been shattered by the very son he had loved most. The Webway project, which was supposed to free humanity from dependence on the warp, lay in ruins. Half of his Space Marine legions had turned traitor. Trillions were dead, and trillions more would die in the fighting to come, but the Emperor was not defeated. He had foreseen this moment, or something like it, and he had prepared. Terra would not fall easily. The Loyalist forces would exact a terrible price for every metre of ground the traitors claimed. And when the final moment came, when Horus stood before him at last, the Emperor would do what had to be done no matter the cost. The Siege of Terra began in earnest when Horus's fleet translated into real space in the Sol system. The sheer scale of the armada was staggering. Hundreds of capital ships, thousands of escorts, and millions of traitor soldiers ready to make planetfall. Against them stood the defences Rogel Dawn had spent years preparing. Fortifications that turned the Imperial Palace into a fortress that could theoretically hold against any conventional assault. The outer system saw fierce naval engagements as Loyalist fleets tried to slow the traitor advance. Ships that had fought together during the Great Crusade now turned their weapons on each other. The fighting around Saturn was particularly brutal, with both sides suffering catastrophic losses, but numbers told in the end. Horus had more ships, more soldiers, and most importantly the backing of the Chaos Gods themselves. The first traitor forces made planetfall far from the Imperial Palace, establishing beachheads and beginning the long advance toward Dawn's fortifications. The defenders made them pay for every kilometre. Dawn had prepared layer upon layer of defences, trench networks, fortified bunkers, minefields, and kill zones designed to channel attackers into predetermined firing lanes. Millions of conscripted soldiers and PDF troops manned these outer defences, ordered to hold as long as possible before falling back to the next prepared position. The traitor forces ground forward through this meat grinder, suffering appalling casualties but always moving closer to their objective. Demon Primarchs led these assaults. Angron, now transformed into a creature of brass and blood, carved through entire battalions with his chain axes. Mortarion brought disease and despair, his death guards spreading plague wherever they went. Fulgrim's Emperor's children pursued sensation and excess, committing atrocities so horrific that even other traitors recoiled in disgust. But the greatest demon engines of all were the Titans, the traitor Titan legions, massive god machines that towered over the battlefield, led the assault on the palace walls. The Legio Mortis deployed their full strength, including the legendary Imperator-class Titan D Zirai, a war machine the size of a small city. Against them, the Loyalist Titans fought desperate holding actions, trading their lives to slow the enemy advance. The fighting raged for weeks, then months. The traitor forces captured the Lionsgate spaceport, allowing them to land their heaviest equipment. They breached the Eternity Wall after days of bombardment that reduced an entire section of fortification to rubble. Dawn conducted the defence with brilliant precision, rotating units to where they were most needed, sacrificing positions when necessary but always making the traitors pay a horrific price. Jagatai Khan led his White Scars in lightning strikes against traitor supply lines, disrupting their logistics and buying time for the defenders. Sanguinius held the Eternity Gate, the final barrier before the Sanctum Imperialis where the Emperor sat upon the Golden Throne. The Blood Angel Primarch fought like a being possessed, his wings carrying him across the battlefield to wherever the fighting was most desperate. But Sanguinius carried a terrible burden. He had foreseen his own death, seen it in visions that plagued him since Horus's betrayal began. He knew that he would die aboard the vengeful spirit, Horus's flagship, killed by his corrupted brother. The knowledge hung over him like a shroud, but it did not weaken his resolve. If his death was inevitable, he would make it count, buying time for the Emperor and the Imperium he served. Horus watched the siege from his flagship, coordinating the assault through his legion commanders and demon allies. But as weeks turned to months, he began to receive disturbing news. The Space Wolves under Leman Russ had evaded the Alpha Legion and were making for Terra. Roboute Guilliman had broken free of the Ruinstorm and was also approaching with the Ultramarines. Lionel Johnson and the Dark Angels were not far behind. If these loyalist forces reached Terra before Horus could claim victory, the siege would turn into a disaster for the traitors. Horus would find himself trapped between the palace defences and relieving armies, caught in a vice with no hope of escape. The Warmaster had gambled everything on a quick victory, betting that he could break the palace defences before significant reinforcements arrived. With time running out, Horus made a desperate decision. He lowered the void shields on the vengeful spirit, broadcasting its location openly to the palace defenders. It was a transparent invitation for the Emperor to teleport aboard and confront him directly. Rogaldorn and Malkador both urged caution, suspecting a trap, but the Emperor knew he had no choice. If the siege continued much longer, too many would die, and even if the palace held, the Imperium would be too weakened to recover. The Emperor assembled a strike force. Himself, Rogaldorn, Sanguinius, and elite forces of Custodian Guard and Space Marine Terminators. They would teleport directly aboard the vengeful spirit, fight their way to Horus, and end the heresy with a single decisive blow. Malkador pleaded with the Emperor not to go, but the Master of Mankind would not be swayed. He embraced Malkador, his oldest friend and most trusted advisor, and asked him to sit upon the golden throne in his absence. Malkador agreed, though he knew the throne would kill him. He was powerful, one of the greatest psykers in human history outside the Emperor himself, but he lacked the raw might necessary to sustain the throne's functions for more than a brief time. But if his death bought the Emperor time to defeat Horus and return, it would be worth the sacrifice. The teleportation did not go as planned. The vengeful spirit's systems had been corrupted by chaos, twisted into a nightmare fusion of metal and demon flesh. The strike force scattered across the ship, individuals and small groups appearing in different sections of the corrupted vessel. The Emperor found himself separated from his sons and guards, alone in a ship that had become a living manifestation of the warp. Sanguinius reached Horus first. The Blood Angel found his brother aboard the bridge, seated on a throne made of brass and bone, surrounded by demons that whispered words of hate and power. The angel tried one final time to reason with his brother, begging Horus to see that he had been deceived, that the Chaos Gods were using him for their own ends. But Horus was far beyond reason. The power of all four Chaos Gods flowed through him now, transforming him into something more demon than man. He offered Sanguinius a choice: join him in overthrowing the Emperor and building a new order, or die defending a tyrant who had lied to them all. Sanguinius refused. He drew his sword and attacked, knowing that this battle would be his last. The two Primarchs clashed in a duel that shook the very fabric of reality around them. Sanguinius fought, with everything he had, drawing on reserves of strength and skill that even he had not known he possessed. He wounded Horus, creating openings in the Warmaster's defences, but it was not enough. Horus toyed with him at first, trying to break Sanguinius's will, rather than simply kill him. The Warmaster knew the angel was broken, worn down by weeks of constant fighting and by the certain knowledge of his impending death. But Sanguinius refused to yield, fought with such stubborn determination that Horus finally grew frustrated. He decided to end it. the Warmaster reached into the 8th dimension, drawing on power that no mortal form should be able to contain, and grabbed Sanguinius out of mid-flight. He slammed the angel to the deck with bone-breaking force and proceeded to beat him to death, using Worldbreaker, his massive power maul, to shatter bones and pulverize flesh. The Talon of Horus, a massive lightning claw, impaled Sanguinius multiple times, the ceramite blades punching through armour and into vital organs. Sanguinius died with the Emperor's name on his lips, his last thought a prayer that his father would succeed where he had failed. Horus strung up the body as a trophy, and when the Emperor finally arrived at the bridge, he found the corpse of his most noble son hanging like a piece of meat. The sight of Sanguinius's broken body affected the Emperor more deeply than Horus had anticipated. For a moment, the Master of Mankind stood in silence, overwhelmed by grief and rage. Then he looked at Horus, at the thing his most beloved son had become, and he knew what had to be done. The duel between the Emperor and Horus was fought across multiple dimensions simultaneously. In the material world, they clashed with sword and claw, power maul and psychic lightning. But the true battle occurred in the warp, where the minds of these two titans wrestled for supremacy. They fought across time, appearing in each other's memories, attacking through past and future simultaneously. Terra, Chthonia, Ulanor, even future Cadia became battlegrounds as the Emperor and Horus struck at each other through the fundamental fabric of reality. The Chaos Gods poured their power into Horus, making him the avatar of their combined might. For the first time in the Emperor's long existence, he faced an opponent who matched him in raw power. Worse, the Emperor found himself unable to use his full strength. Some part of him still hoped to save Horus, to burn away the chaos corruption and reclaim his son. This hesitation nearly proved fatal. Horus exploited it ruthlessly. He crushed the Emperor's windpipe, severed the tendons in his wrists, broke his ribs, plucked out his left eye, and set his hair ablaze with psychic fire. Then, in a demonstration of overwhelming superiority, Horus lifted the Emperor high above his head and brought him down across his knee, shattering the Emperor's spine with an audible crack that echoed across the warp itself. The Emperor lay, broken at Horus's feet, his body shattered beyond any hope of conventional healing. The Warmaster stood over him in triumph, already savouring his victory. But then a figure entered the throne room. Accounts differ on who it was. Some say it was Orlanius Person, an ancient perpetual who had walked at the Emperor's side since the dawn of human civilization. Others claim it was a nameless custodian, loyal to the last breath. Whoever it was, they saw the Emperor broken and dying, and they charged Horus anyway. The Warmaster looked at this mortal, this insignificant being who dared to stand against a god, and he obliterated them with a casual thought. Psychic fire reduced flesh to ash in an instant, and in that moment, seeing Horus casually murder a loyal servant who had shown courage beyond measure, the Emperor finally understood the truth. His son was truly gone. The being wearing Horus's face was nothing more than a puppet of chaos, a threat to everything the Emperor had worked for 40,000 years to achieve. The Emperor gathered his remaining strength and unleashed the full measure of his psychic might. Golden light erupted from his broken form, a wave of pure annihilating power that Horus, for all his demonic strength, could not withstand. The psychic attack burned through Horus's defences, through the blessings of the Chaos Gods, through the armour and flesh and bone, and struck directly at his soul. The Chaos Gods abandoned Horus in that instant. They had no loyalty to their servants, only to their own amusement and power. Faced with the Emperor's full might, they withdrew their blessings and left Horus to his fate. For a brief moment, the Warmaster was himself again, freed from chaos corruption, and he understood with horrifying clarity exactly what he had done. Horus begged his father to kill him. He knew that without the Emperor's power sustaining the strike, the Chaos Gods would reclaim him, would force him to continue the war. he pleaded for the mercy of oblivion. The Emperor, using the last of his strength, granted his son's final wish. The psychic blast intensified, and Horus Lupercal ceased to exist. Body, soul, everything that had been the Warmaster was utterly annihilated, burned from reality so completely that not even the Chaos Gods could resurrect him. But the Emperor's victory came at a cost that doomed him. The psychic effort required to destroy Horus had consumed almost all of his remaining strength. His body was a ruin, so badly damaged that even his perpetual nature could not heal it. When Rogel Dawn finally fought his way to the throne room, he found the Emperor on the verge of death, Horus's body little more than ash, and Sanguinius's corpse still hanging as a grim testament to the heresy's cost. The Emperor, his voice barely a whisper, ordered Dawn to take him to the Golden Throne. Malcador had sustained the throne for as long as he could, but the effort had reduced him to dust, his sacrifice buying the time needed for the Emperor to defeat Horus. Dawn carried his father's broken form through the halls of the vengeful spirit and teleported back to Terra. In the dungeon beneath the Imperial Palace, the Emperor was placed upon the Golden Throne. The ancient mechanisms, enhanced and modified by the Mechanicum, began their work. Life support systems engaged, feeding nutrients directly into the Emperor's bloodstream and oxygenating his blood through artificial means. Psychic amplifiers boosted his remaining mental strength, allowing his consciousness to remain active even as his body began its slow decay. The Emperor spoke his final words to the Primarchs and companions gathered around the throne. He gave instructions for the future of the Imperium, tasks that would sustain his vision even in his absence. Then he fell silent, and he has not spoken aloud in the 10,000 years since. The death of Horus sent psychic shockwaves through the traitor forces besieging Terra. Every space marine of the traitor legions felt it, a sudden emptiness where the Warmaster's presence had been. The Chaos Gods, deprived of their greatest champion, withdrew their support. Demon legions were banished back to the warp. The mortal followers of the traitor cause found themselves leaderless and confused. The loyalist forces seized this moment of confusion. The Blood Angels, driven to madness by visions of Sanguinius's death, broke ranks and charged the traitor positions with such ferocity that even hardened Chaos Space Marines fled before them. This was perhaps the first manifestation of the Black Rage, the curse that would plague the Blood Angels for millennia to come. Reinforcements from the Space Wolves, Ultramarines and Dark Angels arrived in the Sol system, and suddenly the traitors found themselves outnumbered and surrounded. The traitor legions fled Terra in complete disarray. The sons of Horus were the first to break, desperate to escape before their losses became insurmountable. The other legions followed suit, fighting desperate rearguard actions as they retreated to their ships. The Loyalists pursued them without mercy, destroying traitor vessels wherever they could catch them. Over the following years, in the campaign known as the Great Scouring, the Imperium hunted the traitor legions across the galaxy. The traitors ultimately retreated into the Eye of Terror, a massive warp storm where reality and the Immaterium bled together, created by the fall of the Eldari millennia earlier. There, protected by the raw power of chaos itself, they established new domains and licked their wounds. But the Imperium had paid a terrible price for survival. The Emperor, the guiding light of humanity, sat immobile on the Golden Throne, his body slowly crumbling. Each day 1,000 psychers are sacrificed to maintain his psychic strength, their souls consumed to power the Astronomicon and sustain the Emperor's consciousness. Without this beacon, interstellar travel would become impossible, and the Imperium would fragment into isolated pockets of humanity. The dream of a rational, secular Imperium died with the Emperor's internment. In the millennia that followed, the Imperial cult rose to prominence, worshipping the Emperor as a god despite his explicit rejection of divinity. The ecclesiarchy became one of the most powerful institutions in the Imperium, enforcing religious orthodoxy with brutal zeal. Superstition and faith replaced reason and science as the foundation of imperial culture. Roboute Guilliman, one of the few Primarchs to survive the heresy, took on the monumental task of reorganizing the shattered Imperium. He authored the Codex Astartes, breaking the Space Marine legions into smaller chapters to prevent any future rebellion from having the devastating scope of the heresy. He established many of the institutions that would govern the Imperium for the next 10,000 years. Then, having done what he could, Guilliman fell into stasis, gravely wounded and unable to heal. The other loyalist Primarchs disappeared one by one. The Lion fell into a coma within the rock, the Dark Angel's mobile fortress monastery. Leman Russ vanished into the Eye of Terror seeking some way to defeat Chaos. Vulcan departed on a quest to recover artifacts he had hidden across the galaxy. Jagatai Khan pursued Dark Eldar raiders into the Webway and never returned. Korax, driven to despair by the mutations that had overtaken survivors of his legion, retreated into the Eye of Terror seeking penance. Only Rogel Dawn remained active for centuries after the heresy, but eventually even he met his end in a battle against Chaos forces. The Imperium was left without the guiding presence of the Primarchs, governed instead by bureaucrats and priests who claimed to interpret the Emperor's will but lacked the wisdom and power of his gene-sons. 10,000 years later, the Imperium of Man is a grotesque parody of everything the Emperor envisioned. It is authoritarian, theocratic, xenophobic, and brutally repressive. Technological advancement has stagnated, with the Adeptus Mechanicus treating machines as sacred mysteries rather than tools to be understood and improved. Trillions live in squalor on hive worlds, their lives measured only by their capacity to produce weapons and soldiers for the endless wars the Imperium fights. Yet the Imperium survives. Against all odds, despite the depredations of Chaos, Xenos threats, and its own internal corruption, humanity endures. The Emperor's sacrifice maintains the Astronomicon, that beacon in the warp that makes interstellar travel possible. His psychic might, even weakened and divided across a galaxy, provides some protection against the predations of Chaos. In recent times there have been signs of change. Roboute Guilliman was resurrected from his stasis and now serves as Lord Commander of the Imperium, attempting to reform and strengthen the realm his father built. The Great Rift has torn the galaxy in two, making warp travel even more dangerous and isolating entire sectors from Imperial control. New threats emerge constantly. The awakening Necrons, the expanding Toe Empire, the Tyrannid hive fleets, and always eternally the forces of Chaos. The traitor legions remain active in the 41st millennium, still waging war against the Imperium in the name of the Chaos gods. Abaddon the Despoiler, Horus's former lieutenant, has claimed the title of Warmaster and leads the Black Legion in 13 Black Crusades aimed at destroying the Imperium. Other traitor legions pursue their own agendas. The World Eaters offer skulls to the Blood God. The Emperor's children seek ever more extreme sensations. The Death Guard spread Nurgle's plagues, and the Thousand Sons work schemes incomprehensible to mortal minds. Speculation abounds about what would happen if the Golden Throne finally failed, if the mechanisms that sustain the Emperor's existence finally broke down. Some believe his death would doom humanity, extinguishing the Astronomicon and trapping human worlds in isolation while chaos overwhelmed them. Others suggest that his death might free him to be reborn, allowing the Emperor to return and lead humanity once more. Still others whisper of the Star Child, a fragment of the Emperor's compassion that he cast aside to destroy Horus, waiting to be reunited with the rest of his consciousness. The truth is known only to the Emperor himself, if he still possesses enough awareness to contemplate such matters. For 10,000 years he has sat in silence, his mind active in the warp while his body slowly decays. Whether he guides humanity through the Emperor's tarot and visions granted to his most faithful servants, or whether he is entirely consumed by the endless battle to hold back chaos and maintain the Astronomicon, none can say with certainty. What is certain is that the Horus Heresy cast a shadow across human history from which the Imperium has never emerged. The Emperor's greatest betrayal, perpetrated by his most beloved son, transformed the brightest hope for humanity's future into the grim darkness of a galaxy where there is only war. Every day, the Imperium fights for survival against threats that would have been unimaginable during the golden age of the Great Crusade. Every sacrifice, every atrocity committed in the Emperor's name can be traced back to that moment when Horus Lupercal chose ambition and pride over loyalty and duty. The heresy reminds us that even the mightiest can fall, that betrayal can come from those we trust most, and that the price of failure can be paid by countless generations who had no part in the decisions that doomed them. It is a tragedy of cosmic proportions, a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride, ambition, and the corrupting influence of power, and it is the foundation upon which the entire grim darkness of the Warhammer 40,000 universe is built. 10,000 years have passed since Horus fell and the Emperor was entombed. 10,000 years of war, suffering, and desperate survival, and through it all the Emperor endures, silent and immobile, the corpse god worshipped by trillions who never knew him in his glory. Whether he will one day return, whether humanity can ever recover from the wounds the heresy inflicted, remains to be seen. For now, there is only the slow grind of centuries, the endless war, and the faint hope that somehow, somewhere, the Emperor still protects. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Emperor's greatest betrayal, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Obsidian Scriptorium for more Warhammer 40,000 lore. Drop a comment letting me know which aspect of the Horus Heresy you'd like me to explore next. The lore of this universe runs deeper than any ocean, and there are countless stories waiting to be told. Until next time, may the Emperor protect.